tiny tax on the banks could raise billions of pounds every year to help save lives in the poorest countries, fund crucial action against climate change.
But momentum is gathering for some form of bigger tax on the banks. The campaigners said it with this propaganda film.
Gosh. Well, yeah. That is about the some of it. I don't know. Perhaps it's quite a good idea.
But on Tuesday, when Europe's leaders will have this discussion for real, it'll be the all-too-solid French and Germans putting the case, and campaigners' confidence is growing.
Chancellor Merkel's come out in favour, the French government has come out in favour, and I think at the meetings that are to take place next week in Brussels, you'll see a Franco-German push to get this adopted. The European Commission, probably not keen on it, but the Franco-German alliance, plus some other countries are interested in this, I think will carry the day, and Europe will take this forward for the discussions with the Americans. The Americans are less keen on it.
And it's fair to say the traders at Canary Wharf are not ecstatic either. Over the past decade, arguments in favour of a transaction tax have changed. It started out as a way of damping down speculation. Then it became a way of paying for third world debt, and then for climate change. Now, governments look at a place like this and see a very lucrative way of filling the hole in their budgets. From a vantage point like this, you can see how fast things change. 10 years ago, when the dome was built, the idea of a punitive tax on banking was unthinkable. But strange things have happened in this crisis, and it's not over.
Paul Mason. Well, I'm joined in the studio now by Mark Field, the MP whose constituency includes the City of London, and from Leeds by the Labour MP Rachel Reeves, who used to work at the Bank of England and backs the Robin Hood, the Tobin tax campaign. And thank you both very much indeed for joining me. Mark Field, you've seen how trendy this campaign has got. The zeitgeist is very much behind some kind of Tobin tax. Nobody's going to oppose this now, are you?
Oh, I think there's no doubt that George Osborne will do a lot to oppose this. The difficulty is, and I can understand that many of your viewers will say we've put huge amounts of money into the banks to rescue them 2 or 3 years ago. Still a huge amount of government money is there underpinning the banks, yet there seems to be so little agreement about how finance should look for the future. The real worry about a Tobin tax, particularly if it is just a European Tobin tax, is that this is a global market. It's also a global industry, one of the only global industries, substantial industries, where we in this country have got a tremendous competitive advantage. And if we are to turn around and say, right, let's put a huge tax in place here, we will just lose market share, perhaps to Wall Street, but of course to the emerging markets, particularly in China and India, which I think will be the big financial markets of the future. And I think we've got to be very, very concerned about what that will mean, not just in the City of London, actually. It applies just as much to Leeds, where we've got some huge law firms, accountancy firms, but also a lot of other
You know as well as I do that everyone is
this.
always threatening to leave the country or leave, you know, the City of London, and it doesn't happen, frankly.
Well, we say it doesn't happen. I mean, the biggest worry I have about what's happening at the moment with the huge levels of debt and unemployment for our graduates is that some of our brightest and best graduates will leave this country. They will have no incentive to stay if the price of British citizenship is just simply to have to pay huge amounts of tax for the borrowing of your generation and older generations still. So I think that's one of the worries.
It just doesn't work fundamentally if it's not global, and at this rate it won't be global.
Well, the fact that the IMF have now published a paper which says that a financial transactions tax could work, and it could bring in substantial amounts of money, both to reduce budget deficits and tackle some of the challenges of climate change and international development, shows that there is growing international consensus for this tax. It's on the agenda next week at the European Finance Ministers meeting, and it will be on the agenda later in the month when the IMF meet. So I think there is an emerging consensus for this. You said in the report that Germany and France back it. There's also Barmer's pushing through Congress a levy on the banks there. So I think that the time is ripe for a Robin Hood tax, a tax on financial transactions.
Ideologically, you might think it's quite appealing, but if it kicks the City of London hard, if that's passed on in terms of lower tax revenues, higher unemployment, do you really want to be responsible for that?
We're talking about a tax on financial transactions of 0.05% or possibly lower in the IMF report. This isn't a huge tax, but it could make a huge amount of difference to tackling some of the world's problems and some of the problems we have in the UK in terms of reducing the budget deficit whilst also protecting frontline public services.
You don't really believe that Osborne, who even he says he's not ideologically opposed to this, is going to not come under pressure when he goes to Brussels on Tuesday, do you?
I think George Osborne has made the case very clear that this needs to be a global agreement. We have an important global market here in financial services in this country, and if it is simply to be a European-wide tax, we will risk losing huge amounts of work, as I say, across the globe. I think the other thing I would say is, going back to Rachel's point, it sounds like small percentages, 0.005%. When you look at the huge amounts of money, particularly in the currency markets that go through London on a daily basis, that very quickly adds up to quite significant amounts of money. And on one hand, the argument is it's a huge amount of money that we can use for other purposes. On the other hand, it's such a small drop in the ocean. It isn't a drop in the ocean. It will make a real difference to our competitiveness.
Is it fair to concede this is not about reforming bad behaviour or making people act more responsibly? It's like a speed camera. It's just a fast buck for the government, isn't it?
Well, part of the beauty of the financial transactions tax is that it does change behaviour. It does reduce the propensity for short-term, disruptive, speculative trading.
Do you think, Mark, do you think that's right? It will stop speculation?
I really don't think there's very much evidence of that whatsoever. The speculation will go elsewhere, and the profits from speculation will be in the coffers of other countries and other individuals.
Mark, the IMF is a group of over 180 economies around the world. This is not just about the UK going it alone. This is about building an international consensus. We've done it with tax havens and cracking down on tax avoidance internationally. I think we can do it on the Robin Hood tax as well, to bring in money and to reduce short-term speculative activity, which is so damaging both in the UK and internationally.
And if the IMF says it won't harm the market?
Well, the IMF would say that, wouldn't they? I mean, and again, unless they can get some sort of global agreement in place, I think it's going to be very difficult for this to be sold. I can understand the passion that many people feel.
It won't dampen speculation. I mean, they are the International Monetary Fund.
Yeah, but listen, we're going to have a huge amount of speculation has been going on since time immemorial in the financial market. It will continue to do so when we have complicated derivative products and other products that are being created literally on a day-by-day basis. I think the biggest concern I have is I can understand some of the anger that a lot of taxpayers feel. There is perhaps the sense of, well, we should be treating banking like a utility, but unless that is done on a worldwide basis, we will lose out on what is really one of the only big substantial global industries that we have.
The implication seems to be that the banks are still so weak they couldn't tolerate this without sort of collapsing.
Well, I think dare I say, this is one of the other concerns that one has. And if you are going to start effectively diminishing the balance sheets of all of our banks, we need the banks to be successul in order to encourage the growth that we're all looking for in our global economy.
Rachel
But
Reeves.
the banks grew in the first half of this year. The profits of the big four banks alone was in excess of £14 billion. They can afford this extra tax, and if it's done on a consensual basis, working with our partners in Europe and internationally as well, we can bring in money. We won't divert activity from London, but we can make inroads in tackling the deficit without cutting frontline public services and without increasing taxes and reducing benefits on low and middle income families.
And if they pass that on, the point was made, they're not philanthropists. They just pass it on, don't they?
Well, the IMF report that the Newsnight has seen says that the financial transactions tax will fall on the highest paid people, the people with the broadest shoulders, who can bear these additional taxes, unlike increases in VAT, which fall on everyday transactions that none of us can avoid.
Mark Field, you're in danger, if you like, of painting yourself as the Sheriff of Nottingham here, who's kind of running around protecting the rich, aren't you? This is 40 billion a year or 320 billion worldwide.
As I say, I think the reality of the situation is, and I'm not here just to be a mouthpiece for the City of London, obviously it's my constituency here, the reality is without having a successful financial services business in this country, we are going to be in a lot of trouble throughout the country. And as I say, commercial enterprises throughout the UK depend upon this. We need a strong banking sector, and we've made it very clear to the banks, and not just in this country, but across the world, that they need to build up their balance sheets again. And the idea that they're simply doing so in order to pay huge taxes can't be the right way forward.
OK, thank you both very much indeed.